All right, today is September the 22nd, 2025, and there is a lot going on. We're hearing that global conflict is erupting. The United States is warning they're going to be defending every inch of NATO territory. Let's go ahead and take a look at this now. Now, this is video footage that came out, and this is from the Times of India. I've been able to find the video footage of Vladimir Putin's actual speech across various foreign outlets, but I haven't been able to share it on U.S. media outlets, so I can't play it for you. However, what we're hearing is, take a look at this. Putin has threatened military attacks on NATO in a blistering nuclear speech. Make big nuke offer to Trump. So right now we're hearing that Vladimir Putin had this speech. You can go find it online if you'd like to watch it. And he essentially threatened NATO and the United States, but also take a look. Now, this is what's making headlines in the United States. Putin says Russia is willing to abide by nuclear arms deal with the U.S. for 1 year after it expires. So in addition to the threats, he is saying that we are going to go ahead and try to do a nuclear arms deal. Now, also take a look. Just a couple of hours ago, in response to everything that's been going on with the threats between NATO and Russia, we saw the UN come together, and it was pretty intense. Now, I'm able to play for you the U.S. Representative in the UN meeting, but some of the other ones I have not been able, like I said, to just find these on outlets where I can play it for you that are not copywritten. But take a look at this. You can see here, I'm going to read some of the excerpts that came out. It was intense. Estonia, Poland confront Russia at the UN over airspace incursions. NATO allies condemn the reckless Russia for compromising global peace and security as Moscow then hits back, accusing European leaders of primitive hatred and baseless claims. Now, it got pretty intense. Now, like I said, I'm going to play for you the U.S. segment of that UN meeting, but the back and forth, I'm going to read for you the descriptions of what was said. Today, September the 22nd, 2025, it was not anything nice. Now, take a look. This is the part we're going to be playing for you coming out today. Mike Waltz promises the U.S. is going to defend every inch of NATO territory after those Russian jets flew into Estonia. And like I said, I'm going to read for you the clips coming out from Poland and Estonia. And they said, Russia, if you fly anything over, don't come crying to us when we blow up whatever it is that you bring into our airspace, and we hit you back and hit you back hard. It's the back and forth we're going to be covering. Now, take a look at this. Russia now, this coming out in the last 24 hours, has shifted from talks to action. We're hearing more aggressive attacks are taking place in Ukraine, while Russia is now probing various airspaces of NATO. They're saying they're preparing to potentially escalate this. Russia shifts from talk to action, targeting NATO homelands amid fears of global war. NATO's last line of defense stands with how united Russia perceives NATO to be. And take a look. Now, Ukraine, Russia, latest on the war. German jets intercept Russian plane as Trump vows to defend Poland and the Baltics. Donald Trump coming out and saying, we're going to defend them. Germany also getting caught up into this. More and more nations are getting involved. And take a look. Trump warns the U.S. will defend Poland and Baltics in Russia. If Russia keeps escalating, we don't like it. You can see September the 21st, 2025. All of these articles, these headlines. This is the latest coming out in the past 24 hours. Yesterday, Sunday the 21st. Today, Monday, September the 22nd. A lot unfolding. Now, I'm going to get you caught up on the latest as we're hearing that global conflict essentially is erupting. Over the last couple of hours, today, the 22nd, we've seen Putin coming out with these threats, these warnings, and offering a potential extension of that nuclear proliferation arms deal treaty. And then the UN coming out, and we saw Poland, Estonia, the United States, the UK, various nations come out with some very fiery, aggressive words against Russia, condemning them for what's going on, warning them of potential global war, and Russia hitting back at all of them. And like I said, I'm going to read for you the various clips from the articles coming out. Now, I haven't been able to find U.S. video footage coverage of a lot of the UN representatives coming out and speaking, but I did find for you the U.S. representative. We're going to be playing that. I'm going to play for you the clips. We're going to read the articles, get you caught up on the latest. But I got to say, what's coming out today, September the 22nd, 2025, it looks like things are erupting. It looks very escalatory. It does not look like we're heading in the direction of peace, which I know a lot of people wanted to see this de-escalate. We're going to see where we go from here, but from the meetings that I saw today, the video footage, what I'm reading in the headlines, things are looking like they are heading in the direction of getting much more intense. So we're going to dive into the video footage and the articles so that way you can see it for yourself. Now, before we do, if you appreciate the updates, keeping you up to speed on everything, do me a favor, take a quick second, hit the thumbs up like button. Like I said, I know that nobody really likes this type of news, that the conflict is escalating, but if you appreciate the breaking news, hit that thumbs up like button. Just helps the channel out while we're live, spreads this out across the YouTube platform, so more people can get the latest updated information. And in addition to that, if you by chance happen to find UN video footage that is from US media outlets that I can play that don't have copyright restrictions, please let me know. I've been looking, I've been only able to find them on foreign media news outlets that I can't play. Now, also, to stay up to date, as more information comes out, hit that subscribe button. I'll keep you up to speed here on the channel. It's totally free. And here on the channel, I cite all the sources, put it on the screen, read right from it, hyperlink it in the description. I cite the sources like a book report to hold myself accountable, so that way you can know that this is the latest and most current information of what is going on. So let's go ahead and start off with what happened with the UN. Like I said, I'm not able to play some of the clips on here. Let me just show you some screenshots. This was 5 hours ago. This was the speech at the UN that took place. All the different nations came together. Before that, we saw Putin come out, and he had his speech. You can see the date, September 22nd, 2025, with the threats that were issued. But let's take a look. I can share with you, coming out from Live Now with Fox, what the UN Security Council on Ukraine had to say regarding the Russian war and how they said, we will defend every inch of NATO territory. Let's go ahead and play this and take a look.
Colleagues, just 9 days ago, this council met to discuss Russia's violation of Poland's airspace with a large number of military drones. In that meeting, the United States urged Russia to end the war in Ukraine and stop actions that could risk it escalating into a broader conflict. Instead, on September 19th, Russia again violated the airspace of a NATO member when 3 armed military aircraft flew 10 nautical miles into Estonian airspace, coming within 15 miles of the Estonian parliament. And as we said 9 days ago, the United States stands by our NATO allies in the face of these airspace violations, and I want to take this first opportunity to repeat and to emphasize the United States and our allies will defend every inch of NATO territory. Russia must urgently stop such dangerous behavior. At a time when President Trump in the United States has been focused and spent an enormous amount of time and effort to end this horrific war between Russia and Ukraine, we expect Russia to seek ways to de-escalate, not risk expansion. This event, following on the heels of the Russian drone incursion into Polish airspace, creates the impression that Russia either wants to escalate and pull more countries into this conflict with Ukraine, or doesn't have full control of those who operate its fighter planes and drones. So either scenario is very disconcerting, given that Russia is obviously a nuclear power with global reach. And so I once again urge Russia as a permanent member of this council to uphold international peace and security, to respect the sovereignty of its neighbors, to cease violating their airspace, and I call on Russia to negotiate directly with Ukraine to end that war. I thank you, and I very much am honored and look forward to working with each of you.
There you have it, you guys. So that was the United States at the UN meeting, and they said they will be defending every inch of NATO territory. Now, that came out as a response to everything that's been going on with the conflict between Russia and the NATO nations that are saying their airspace is now being violated. Now, in addition to that, as I mentioned, we saw some video footage coming out. This is from the Times of India. I can't play it for you, but you can go ahead and look this up. September the 22nd, 2025, source Viry. We're hearing that right now Putin has come out and he has made threats, and he has also requested that the United States extend their nuclear agreement. Now, take a look. Let me just read this for you very quickly before we get into the U.S. media outlets. Putin has threatened, September the 22nd, military attack on NATO in blistering nuclear speech. Makes big nuclear offer to Donald Trump. Russian President Vladimir Putin delivered a stern warning during his latest address, declaring that Moscow will no longer rely on words in the face of growing Western military threats. And in this speech, he talks about how the United States needs to meet Russia at their level of pulling back on nuclear development. He stressed that Russia is fully capable of countering any current or emerging challenge with decisive military technical measures. As an example, Putin announced the lifting of Russia's unilateral moratorium on deploying intermediate or short-range ground-based missiles, citing the expansion of U.S. and Western weapons programs in Europe and the Asia-Pacific. He underlined that strengthening Russia's defense capabilities remains a top priority, with plans of moving forward in line with global shifts. So he's saying, we're willing to do this, we're willing to negotiate. However, we need to see the United States not pushing their agenda and trying to push to become the global power. So they really called out the United States quite a bit in this speech. However, Putin also brought to the table a potential agreement. Take a look at this. Now, this is all over U.S. news media outlet headlines. You can find this everywhere. If you just Google search Putin right now, this is going to come up everywhere. Putin says that Russia is willing to abide by a nuclear arms deal with the U.S. for 1 year after it expires. So very fascinating that they're primarily focused on this, but not on the threats that were issued out. Let's take a look at this. Coming out today, just a little while ago, you can see here, Russian President Vladimir Putin on Monday today declared his readiness to adhere to nuclear arms limits for 1 more year under the last remaining nuclear pact with the United States that expires in February. And he urged Washington to follow suit. And some would say he even almost threatened Washington to follow suit. Putin said allowing the New START agreement signed in 2010 to expire would be destabilizing and could fuel proliferation of nuclear weapons. His televised remarks came at a time of heightened tensions between Russia and the West, and with concerns rising that fighting in Ukraine could spread beyond its borders. Now, to avoid provoking a further strategic arms race and to ensure an acceptable level of predictability and restraint, we believe it is justified to try to maintain the status quo established by the New START treaty during the current, rather turbulent period. Putin said while speaking from the Kremlin. He said Russia is prepared to stick by the treaty's limits for 1 more year after it expires on February 5th of 2026. Arms controls advocates long have voiced concern about the treaty's looming expiration and the lack of dialogue to secure a successor deal, warning about the possibility of a new nuclear arms race and increased risk of nuclear conflict. Putin said maintaining limits on nuclear weapons could also be an important step in creating an atmosphere conducive to substantive strategic dialogue with the United States. Now, the New START, signed by then U.S. President Barack Obama and Russian counterpart Dmitry Medvedev, limits each country to no more than 1,550 deployed nuclear warheads and 700 deployed missiles and bombers. The pact also stipulates the need for on-site inspections to verify compliance, although inspections were halted in 2020 because of the COVID-19 pandemic and were never resumed. The treaty was originally supposed to expire in 2021, but was extended for 5 more years. Now, Putin has urged the United States to reciprocate. Now, this is one of the parts that I mentioned was in that speech. Putin emphasized that Russia expected the U.S. to follow its example and stick to the treaty's limits. We believe this measure will only be viable if the United States acts in a similar manner, Putin said. Daryl Kimball, the director of the Washington-based Arms Control Association, welcomed Putin's statements on X as an important and positive move. He and other arms control experts long have prodded Moscow and Washington to quickly reach an intermittent deal to maintain existing nuclear weapons limits. More nuclear weapons will not make anyone safer, Kimball said in a commentary earlier this month. By agreeing not to exceed the current strategic nuclear limits, they could reduce tensions, forestall a costly arms race that no one can win, create diplomatic leverage to curb the buildup of China's arsenal and buy time for talks on a broader, more durable treaty. U.S. President Donald Trump has said that he and Putin talked about nuclear weapons during their summit in Alaska last month. Asked to comment in July on a looming expiration of the New START, Trump noted that it is a big problem for the world when you take off nuclear restrictions. Now, in his televised comments, Putin instructed Russian agencies to closely monitor relevant American activities, particularly with regard to the strategic offensive arms arsenal. Among the concerns he cited were any preparations by the U.S. to deploy missile interceptors in space. So here you go, you guys. We're hearing that Russia's main concern in this big announcement that he had today is the United States. So there were threats that were issued to NATO, to the U.S., but a lot of it is the concerns of nuclear arms races where we would be competing with Russia, the United States and Russia. Russia saying, let's not do that. Such a move would compel Russia to respond accordingly, he said. Now, the pivotal pact. In February of 2023, Putin suspended Moscow's participation in the New START treaty, saying Russia couldn't allow the U.S. inspections of its nuclear sites at a time when Washington and its NATO allies have openly declared Moscow's defeat in Ukraine as their goal. Now, at the same time, Russia has emphasized that it wasn't withdrawing from the pact or altogether withdrawing, and pledged to respect the caps on nuclear weapons set under the treaty and keep notifying the United States about test launches of ballistic missiles. Another key U.S.-Russian nuclear arms pact was terminated in 2019. That was the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, which was signed in 1987 and banned land-based missiles with a range between 500 to 5,500 kilometers or 310 to 3,400 miles. As tensions between Russia and the West have escalated over the conflict in Ukraine, NATO allies in Europe have recently accused Russia of what they said was provocation, including Russian drones in Polish airspace and fighter jets in Estonian airspace. Now, the Associated Press received support for nuclear security coverage from the Carnegie Corporation. Oh, this is coming out from the Associated Press. This is not really a part of the article. But there you have it, you guys. We're hearing that right now that has been offered on the table by Vladimir Putin. Now, we're going to be seeing where we go from here. Now, like I said, we had some very aggressive discussions take place as the UN responded to this. Now, this is some more video footage coming out from foreign news media outlets. They covered what was unfolding. I played for you the U.S.'s part in that, as we had heard them say, we will defend every inch of NATO territory. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at what it was the other nations had to say, and let me know your thoughts on this. It was not a friendly, peaceful back and forth. Very aggressive. A lot of threats issued out today. Let's go ahead and take a look at this. Now, the article says that NATO allies clashed with Russia at the United Nations on Monday today, accusing Moscow of risking global peace by violating the alliance's airspace in Estonia and Poland. The emergency meeting of the UN Security Council was convened in New York on the evening of September the 22nd, following a series of airspace incursions by Russian military aircrafts and drones. This included the unauthorized entry of Russian fighter jets into Estonian airspace on Friday, that was last week, as well as the earlier breach of the Polish airspace by more than 20 Russian drones, prompting NATO to scramble jets to shoot them down. Now, speaking at the meeting, Estonian Foreign Ministry Margus Chestakna called on fellow Security Council members to force Russia to abandon its criminal, neo-colonial, and imperial ambitions. He also responded to Russia's allegations from earlier in the day that Estonia had fabricated the incident. Russia said that Estonia made the whole thing up. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov had earlier dismissed Tallinn's claim, telling reporters that Moscow never heard in the Estonian statement that they had objective monitoring data. That they have objective monitoring data. That is why we consider such words to be empty, unfounded, and a continuation of a completely reckless pattern of escalating tensions and provoking a confrontational atmosphere, Peskov had said, adding that Russian Defense Ministry categorically denies any airspace violations. Now, in retaliation, he showed the meeting a printout of Estonia's air radars and close-up pictures of Russian jets, adding that they all carried missiles and were combat ready. We remember the occupation of Georgia in 2008, 2014 Crimea, and 2022 aggression against Ukraine. So please, don't lie again. Hard evidence is here, he said. Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski addressed Moscow directly. We know you don't care for international law, and you are incapable of living in peace with your neighbors. Now, I have only one request to the Russian government, he warned. If another missile or aircraft enters our space without permission, deliberately or by mistake, and gets shot down and the wreckage falls on NATO territory, please don't come here to whine about it. You have been warned. So, some serious threats coming out from those nations, getting very aggressive in their rhetoric with Russia. Newly appointed U.S. envoy to the UN, Michael Waltz, and we just played that video footage for you a second ago, in his first appearance since assuming the role, reaffirmed Washington's commitment to the collective defense. So the United States is saying, if things pop off between Russia and NATO, we're going to be right in the middle of it, warning about the global conflict that could be coming here as things have gotten very tense today, September the 22nd, 2025. He said, I want to take this first opportunity to repeat and to emphasize that the United States and our allies, we will defend every inch of NATO territory. British Foreign Secretary Yvette Cooper echoed allies' concerns, saying, your reckless actions risk direct armed confrontation between NATO and Russia. Our alliance is defensive. But be under no illusion, we stand ready to defend NATO's skies and NATO's territories. If we need to confront planes operating in NATO space without permission, then we will do so, she continued. EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas told Russian representatives, your government's actions are reckless, dangerous, and they go against the very principles of the United Nations. Russia will continue to provoke as long as we allow it, she cautioned. Meanwhile, Russia's representative to the UN Security Council, Dmitry Polensky, hit back at European leaders, accusing them of primitive hatred of Russia and issuing baseless claims, launching into a barbared rhetoric attack. He claimed that Voltaire, Rousseau, Kant had been replaced by von der Leyen, Colossus, Johnson's, and other small-time blinkered Russophobes. Now, Polensky finished by accusing Europe of being like an unhinged, paranoid individual, unable to respond to criticism, nor is it able to remember the lessons of history. We won't be partaking in this theater of the absurd, and you don't need us there, he concluded in his incendiary speech. Now, on September 19th, Estonia said that 3 Russian MiG-31 fighters had violated Estonian airspace without permission and stayed for a total of 12 minutes before being forced to withdraw. The episode was described by Estonian Foreign Minister Margus Tashna as Russia's most brazen violation to date and led to Russia's charged affairs in Estonia being summoned as the incident drew global condemnation. Right now, that is why we are seeing Article 4. What we are seeing is the meetings discussing how they're going to be proceeding and whether we need to go to all-out war. Now, so there you have it, you guys. That coming out just a couple of hours ago today. So those were the words, the confrontations that are currently taking place at this time. And as I mentioned to you, we saw the video footage. The United States said, we will defend every inch of NATO territory. So right now the U.S. is saying we will be in the middle of this. And there's that footage that we saw. Let's go ahead and take a look at this very quickly here. The new UN ambassador Mike Waltz warned Monday today the U.S. and its allies will defend every inch of NATO territory after Russian fighter jets violated Estonian airspace. The United States stands by our NATO allies in the face of these airspace violations, and I want to take this first opportunity to repeat and to emphasize that the United States and our allies will defend every inch of NATO territory, Waltz said during opening remarks of the United Nations General Assembly High-Level Week. Russia must urgently stop this dangerous behavior. Now, the warning marked one of Waltz's first public statements since winning Senate confirmation Friday. It came days after 3 Russian MiG-31 jets flew deep into Estonian airspace, the closest such incursions to the Baltic nations' parliament building in years, raising fears that Moscow is testing NATO's resolve. Now, Estonia's foreign minister, Margus Tashtakna, revealed Monday morning that the jets were armed, that the jets were in Estonian airspace for 12 minutes, as we just read in that previous article. He noted that Russia remains a permanent member of the UN Security Council even as it continues its war on Ukraine and now pushes into NATO territory. Article 5 of the NATO treaty states that an armed attack against one or more NATO members in Europe or North America is considered an attack against them all. And so that is why there are fears that this could blow up into a global conflict right now. And you just heard how tense some of the exchanges were in that meeting that took place a couple of hours ago today. In practice, this means that if any member nation is attacked, the others are committed to taking action. Waltz, a former House member from Florida, served as President Donald Trump's national security advisor until May. His confirmation to the UN was held up in the Senate until last week, when a 47-43 vote confirmed him as the U.S. permanent representative to the UN Security Council. A separate vote to confirm him as U.S. representative to the General Assembly did not come up. It's unclear whether that will have any effect on his participation at the UNGA. So the United States is saying we will be right there in the middle of all of it, and we are seeing Russia intensify their attacks. Now, let's take a look at some more video footage here so that way you can see what is currently going on as the UN Security Council held their emergency meeting today over the Estonian airspace being violated by Russian aircrafts. Let's go ahead and take a look at some more footage to get you the latest updates.
Okay, the UN Security Council is holding an emergency meeting today to discuss Russian fighter jets illegally entering Estonian airspace on Friday. That incident follows military action by Poland shooting down Russian drones in its airspace 2 weeks ago. All of this happening as the UN General Assembly gets underway. So to discuss this, I want to bring in former Ambassador John Sullivan. He's the former U.S. Deputy Secretary of State and former U.S. Ambassador to Russia. Ambassador, always good to see you, sir. So let's talk about what can be accomplished at this week's meetings.
Well, thanks, Vlad. Good to be with you again. Difficult to imagine that there's going to be anything accomplished with respect to Russia's war against Ukraine. This war is extending now, coming up on 4 years, and the UN has been powerless to the Security Council because of Russia's veto, powerless to take any significant action. So I'm not optimistic that there will really be anything that the UN will do this week that will have an effect on that terrible war in Europe.
So, as you know, Poland's prime minister says he will not hesitate, Poland will not hesitate to shoot down objects that violate its airspace. What does that mean for Russia? What does that mean for the United States, given President Trump's often less than supportive comments about the NATO alliance?
Well, the first and most important thing to recognize, as you point out, Vlad, is that Poland is a NATO ally. And if Poland is attacked, or even something not quite as significant, if its airspace is violated, we have obligations, we, the United States and other NATO allies, have obligations under the North Atlantic Treaty to, in this case, with the airspace incursion, consult with Poland, so-called Article 4 consultations, which Poland has sought. My thinking, Vlad, is that this is Russia testing Europe, testing Europe's unity, and testing the United States' commitment to its NATO allies. Will the United States forcefully back Poland in defending its airspace?
And so if that were to occur, if there was an intrusion into Polish airspace by Russian jets or Russian drones or any kind of Russian aircraft, Russian offensive aircraft, and the United States didn't call for Article 4, what would that mean? Just put yourself in the mind of Putin, right? I mean, I'm just trying to understand. Sure. He gives it a test and nothing happens, so then what's next?
Well, I think this is part of a pattern, Vlad. What we've seen, we saw Russian aircraft violate Estonian airspace most recently. We saw a drone swarm into Poland. We saw drones in Romania. This is not a coincidence. When I was ambassador in Russia, we had a rule. One of our first rules of operating in Russia was sort of a rule of thumb. There are no coincidences. These aren't accidents. These aren't mistakes. These are intentional provocations by the Russians, testing NATO, testing the United States. And if Putin sees that the United States is not going to back its NATO allies, that's very bad news for the alliance.
And we should point out for students of history, the only time that Article 5, the next level from Article 4, the attack on one is an attack on all, was ever invoked was when the United States was attacked after 9/11 or on 9/11. All right, let's talk about what Putin said today, which was that he was ready to extend an arms control treaty between Washington and Moscow to limit nuclear weapons on both sides for a year. Explain the significance of that.
Well, there's one arms control treaty that remains between the United States and Russia, the so-called New START treaty. It was extended for 5 years by President Biden and President Putin at the very start of President Biden's term. The treaty provided for a one-time 5-year extension. That's it. If the two presidents were to decide they wanted this treaty to continue in effect beyond that 5-year extension, which expires in February of 2026, there's a very good argument that that's a new treaty that would be subject to review by the United States Senate. So I think there's a significant legal cloud over the authority of the two presidents on their own, at least with respect to U.S. law and the U.S. Constitution, to extend this treaty without the U.S. Senate getting involved.
Fascinating. All right, Ambassador John Sullivan, sir, thank you very much as always.
So there you have it, you guys. So that is an explanation as to where things are currently going right now. And as they mentioned, airspace being violated with Poland, Romania, Estonia, and now we're going to be seeing where we go from here. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at some more footage coming out here. Let me play for you. I just want to get you some of the latest clips so you can see everything that they're saying regarding what has unfolded in the last 24, 48 hours.
Mr. Ambassador, Russia just unleashed another strike on Ukraine, 600 drones used. This is President Trump and Ukraine Zelensky plan to meet this week. It seems that nothing is changing in this war. And we also have this report of Russian jets spending 12 minutes in the airspace of Estonia, a NATO member. Putin just keeps on pushing. At what point is there a very strong response?
Well, the key is that when the Polish incursion from the drones happened, NATO immediately scrambled fighter jets, shot down some of the drones. And on this Estonian incursion with the jet fighters, we also scrambled F-35s and chased them out of Estonian airspace. Now, the question, Stuart, ultimately is that do we want to go up the escalation ladder? And we're having meetings tomorrow in Brussels where I'll be in attendance, where we're going to talk about these very issues with the Supreme Allied Commander and our allies and find out kind of what we need to do, if more. But, you know, it's working. Our air policing is working, is what I'm going to tell you.
But it seems like Putin is just pushing us around.
Well, he can't push us around. He's barely making any gains in Ukraine on the ground there. You know, the bottom line is we need strong responses, but at the same time, I think we need to be stronger. It's what happened coming out of the Hague summit. Everyone's agreeing to spend more money. We are ramping up our militaries. People are buying F-35 fighter jets, upgrading their technology. NATO's getting stronger by the day, and you'll see continuing responses that show strength, and that strength is ultimately what's going to guarantee the peace.
We're not going to impose secondary sanctions on those people who buy Russian oil?
Well, we need our NATO allies to quit buying Russian oil, and I've had some very strong conversations, and we'll continue those as soon as I have a chance to sit down with our allies. You know, President said that we can't be 100% strong and unified if we have NATO allies that are buying Russian oil, and we need to work to transition them off Russian oil. I was in Poland last week, and Poland no longer buys any Russian oil. They have completely gone off of that, and we need all NATO allies to do that because we need the price of oil to be low. We need to quit funding Russia's war machine, and I think those circumstances will what's ultimately going to create what's necessary for peace in that war in Ukraine.
There you have it, you guys. And also, we had heard that warning coming out from Donald Trump saying, listen, NATO, if you're going to go this route, I need you to stop buying Russian oil. He kind of put an ultimatum on him saying, if you want to go this route to war with Russia, it's not a good negotiating piece if you are trying to, do all these things and intensify and escalate, yet at the same time, you're buying oil from Russia. He said, not a very good move. So he said, the first thing we need to do is we need to have you stop with buying Russian oil. Now, in addition to that, you had heard them mention, is the United States going to be supporting NATO allies? And a lot of people were speculating maybe they're not. This ultimatum we heard from Trump. Yet we heard today, as I mentioned to you, I played for you the video footage in that UN meeting, the United States representative said, we will defend every inch of NATO territory. And also, take a look at this. In the last 24 hours, Trump warns the U.S. will defend Poland and the Baltics if Russia keeps escalating. We don't like it. You can see the date, September 21st, 2025. Now, let's take a look at this article here that says President Donald Trump warned on Sunday, yesterday, that the United States will defend Poland and the Baltic countries if Russia's aggression escalates after a series of incursions into the airspace of NATO's allies. So, just to make it clear, what we are hearing at this time, the U.S. will be a part of any global conflict that erupts between NATO and Russia. Now, Trump asked by reporters at the White House lawn whether America will defend Poland and the Baltics if Russia keeps accelerating, responded, "Yeah, I would. I would." Trump, speaking moments before flying to Arizona's funeral of the assassinated conservative icon Charlie Kirk, also confirmed that he had been briefed on the most recent tense situation, which involved Estonia saying, "Yeah, we don't like it." Now, on Friday, Estonia said NATO intercepted 3 Russian MiG-31 fighter jets that flew into its airspace without permission and stayed there for about 12 minutes. Russia promptly issued a denial, claiming that the flights were made in strict accordance with international rules and without violating the borders of other countries. The alleged incursion took place after Poland had consulted with NATO allies when multiple Russian drones and fighter jets breached its airspace the week before. Now, on September 9th, Poland claimed that 19 to 23 Russian drones entered its airspace and that at least 4 of them were shot down. Days after that, Romania had claimed that a Russian drone entered its airspace as well. All 3 countries are members of NATO, which means if attacked, they could invoke the international organization's Section 5, which requires the entire alliance to take military action against the attackers. And they're saying that would provoke global conflict and World War III. So those are the concerns right now. Do you think that's the route we're going? Do you think that we're going to be entering into global conflict and World War III? Let me know your thoughts. If so, put war. If no, put peace. Drop them in the comments. Let me know your thoughts. And also, if you haven't done so yet, please take a second, hit that like button. I see we were getting close to 6,000 people on with me live. If you haven't done so yet and you appreciate the updates, hitting that like button very quickly really helps out the channel a ton while we're live. Now, as you heard from the video footage, Russia is not de-escalating. They are escalating the conflict. They are increasing their attacks. They're into new airspace. Let's take a look at some of these articles so that way you can see what's going on. This coming out yesterday, Sunday, September the 21st, 2025. Now, this article says Russia shifts from talk to action. So things are not slowing down. NATO homeland amid fears of global war. NATO's last line of defense stands with how united Russia perceives NATO to be. Now, this article says NATO has been on high alert since Russia invaded Ukraine more than 3.5 years ago, but a recent spike in the alliance's airspace violations has security experts increasingly concerned that warnings of war with Moscow are no longer theoretical, but inevitable. Let me know your thoughts. I am seeing in the comments here war popping up quite a bit. A lot of people saying, yes, this is the direction we're going to be going. Now, the article says that President Donald Trump on Thursday last week said the U.S. could end up in World War III over Russia's war in Ukraine and conceded that Russian President Vladimir Putin has let him down over his refusal to end his military campaign. One day later, Russia sent 3 fighter jets over Estonia's capital city in Tallinn in a direct and clear violation of its airspace, prompting another NATO member to spark Article 4 for the second time in as many weeks. Now, Russia is testing NATO again. Dozens of drones in Poland last week, drones in Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, and now fighter jets in Estonian skies. These are deliberate provocations, Lithuanian Defense Minister Dovilė Sakalin told Fox News Digital. They are deliberate tests, tests of our readiness, our resolve, and of the limits of our deterrence. Now, Sakalin said the Friday violation was just the latest in an escalating pattern of pressure by Russia. For Estonia, for Poland, for Lithuania, for all of NATO's eastern flank, this is a direct threat, not just to territorial integrity, but to citizens' safety, she added. The Lithuanian defense minister warned that the biggest line of defense NATO holds right now, apart from its actual military readiness, is showing a united front to dissuade Moscow from taking direct actions against a NATO member and prompting what could become a global war. Our biggest risk currently is miscalculation by Russia, she said. Does Russia believe that NATO will not allow violations of its territory? Does Russia believe that Europe is going to strike back together with the United States? That's now the last line of defense between if and when war with Russia happens, she added. Now, concern over direct NATO conflict with Moscow escalated earlier this month after a swarm of at least 19 Russian drones not only flew over Polish airspace, but forced a multinational response when NATO, for the first time since the war began, fired upon Russian assets and brought down as many as 4 drones that posed threats. While Trump suggested that the drone swarm could have been a mistake, Poland refutes this and said that it was deliberate and it was a planned provocation. Drone strikes have long been a favored wartime tool of Russia in its operations against Ukraine, with the number of strikes peaking in July with some 6,297 long-range drones fired across the country. That figure dipped to 4,216 drones fired in August, though notably the majority of these UAVs were fired between August 16th and the 31st, when some 3,001 drones were deployed beginning the day after Trump met with Putin in Alaska on August 15th. An American company, which sat less than 30 miles from the 2 other NATO nations, Hungary and Slovakia, was also hit with several cruise missiles in late August. Now, the scope of the air attacks from Russia to Ukraine is really rising. They are using more drones, more rockets, and they are still expected to rise, she said. We have to admit and adapt to the new reality. High-intensity war by Russia against Ukraine is ongoing, the defense minister said. That means that more and more UAVs are going to wander off into the territories of the bordering countries and even further. Russia has increasingly turned to gray zone tactics, which involve incidents that fall below the threshold of open warfare, but which allow Russia to test NATO's resolve and response capabilities. Now, over the last month, Poland saw 3 separate incidences in which its airspace was violated by Russian drones, including UAVs carrying explosive components that crossed into its airspace from both Ukraine and Belarus. Now, just 3 days after the drone swarm bombarded Polish air defense systems, a Russian drone crossed into Romanian airspace and prompted a French fighter jet and Polish helicopters to respond under NATO's Operation Eastern Sentry, a defense posture the alliance launched just 1 day prior. These events came after Lithuania in late July was forced to sound the alarm following 2 separate incidents in which Russian Gerber drones violated its borders, including one which was carrying explosives. But these tactics are not the only threats that security experts in recent weeks have flagged as concerning behavior from Moscow. Earlier this month, the Institute for the Study of War, based in Washington, D.C., drew attention to an op-ed published by former Russian President and current Security Council Chair Dmitry Medvedev on September 8th in a state-sponsored news outlet, TASS, which used language that directly mirrored rhetoric by the Kremlin in the lead-up to its invasion in Ukraine. In the article, Medvedev accused Finland of being Russophobic and claimed the thirst for profit at the expense of Russia was installed in Finnish minds back in the days of Hitler. He further claimed that Helsinki has attempted to erase the historical and cultural identity of ethnic Russians and said joined NATO under the guise of defense, but in actuality was covertly preparing for war against Russia, reported the ISW. Medvedev's comments were not standalone threats. Multiple Kremlin officials, including Putin, who said there will be problems after Finland joined NATO, have claimed the alliance will use Finland as a springboard to attack Russia. Russia has been steadily setting conditions to attack NATO over the past several years. Moscow is standing up new divisions and optimizing its command and control headquarters on NATO's eastern flank. George Barros, senior Russian analyst with ISW, told Fox News Digital, the Kremlin information warfare apparatus is fabricating claims and justifications for why Finland, the Baltic states, and Poland are not real countries. So there you have it. We're hearing that Russia getting very aggressive, shifting from talk to a lot of action And we're seeing various nations right now responding to this, and that is why we saw that UN meeting. And take a look, even German jets are intercepting Russian planes as Trump has vowed to defend Poland and the Baltics. We're hearing the United States is saying we're going to be right there every step of the way. Now, let's take a look at some of the stuff that's been unfolding over the weekend so that way you can get caught up in case you missed it. A lot of invasions by Russia onto NATO territories. And right now, as we speak today, that UN meeting regarding Article 4 and whether or not NATO is going to get more aggressive with Russia. And as I shared with you, the back and forth, it was pretty intense. But let's take a look at what has been unfolding.
Russia launching yet another massive attack across Ukraine using more than 600 drones and missiles as President Trump is set to sit down with Ukrainian President Zelensky at the UN General Assembly this week. Fox News senior strategic analyst, retired four-star General Jack Keane joining us now. General, good morning. Thank you for joining us. What do you make of yet another attack? As we mentioned, 600 attack drones. You got, I think, 8 ballistic missiles, 32 cruise missiles, some of it launched even in the western part of Ukraine. Your reaction?
Yeah, well, you gotta know where Putin's head really is. You know, he's 3.5+ years into this war, and he hasn't been able to achieve his military objectives, which is take control of Ukraine, both military and politically. But he hasn't given up on those objectives, Griff. That's the reality of it. And what we see here is he's absolutely convinced that the best pathway forward to achieve those objectives is by escalating the war. And that's what we're seeing, an air campaign with the escalation you just noted, which has been going on now for a number of weeks. He's also expanding that in a limited way, but also in a historic way into eastern Ukraine, into Eastern Europe, NATO countries with that. And that is historic, not seen, you know, since World War II, the reality of what we're dealing with here. So, and also he's expanding his ground campaign in the Donbass region. Why is he doing all of that? Because he's absolutely convinced, look, at the West hasn't done anything that convinced me that this strategy is not going to work. And enter, I think, what the West can do. We are holding the cards. And what Putin is trying to convince us of is that a military victory is inevitable. And he believes he can wear out the West, the United States and the Europeans and the Ukrainians. But the reality is we're holding the cards. If we double down on the sanctions that it looks like it's going to happen and also help Ukraine militarily, he cannot take Ukraine. We can stop him, and that'll force him to the negotiating table.
You're so right, General Keane, that the West is holding the cards, and it'll be interesting to see what comes of President Trump's conversation on the sidelines with President Zelensky. I want to just...
Let's bring in Andrew Boreen, Senior Fellow at the National Security Institute. He's also a board member at Special Operations Association of America. Andrew, it would seem like Vladimir Putin and the Russians have their hands full just trying to eke out some kind of victory in Ukraine where they're not doing very well. What are they doing sending jets over Poland and now Estonia?
Well, thanks for having me again, John. I really appreciate it. These are critical issues that the American public really needs to start understanding just how hot the conflict is becoming with our European allies. And I'll start by saying that these are not isolated incidents and they are not accidents. In my assessment, these are very deliberate efforts by President Putin and the Russian military to see how far they can go into NATO proper territory, into those precious inches of NATO that we discuss when we talk about defending every inch of NATO. And it's an active probe to see how far and how much they can get away with keeping things at an Article 4 consultation level, which is essence, hey, let's have an emergency meeting of leaders. We might investigate the incident versus an Article 5 issue, which is going to trigger collective defense. The only time in history that collective defense has been triggered and used was after the attacks of September 11, 2001 upon the United States. So in my assessment, this is a very active escalation of very much a Russian hybrid warfare effort and a machine that is seeking to cause disunity among the United States and its strongest European allies.
Well, the Russians say that this was, well, they say it was not an incursion. They say that they were flying in international airspace. Do you buy that, first of all?
No, I don't buy that.
All right, so if it was an intentional incursion, what's their goal?
Like I said, the goal is to see how much they can get away with. And I think that President Trump and the White House have really leaned forward in saying the last several years of sanctions are not sufficient to bring Vladimir Putin and the Russian, call it a hybrid war effort, to the negotiating table. Without secondary sanctions that target Russian oil, without secondary sanctions that target other Russian energy exports, that remove their kind of what we call a shadow fleet of shipping and that allows them access to international trade and funding. Without, other allies like Brazil, India, and other BRICS nation members helping to enforce secondary sanctions, the Russian regime has ample resources to continue and grind a painful, costly war that has been targeting Ukrainians for 3 years now.
But didn't the European Union just approve another round of sanctions on Russia?
They did, and in my assessment, that's a good indicator that there remains a great deal of political unity on issues of common defense. We do see a lot in the news about issues related to trade and economic policy, and but I think that this is an indication that when it comes to the defense of those precious inches of NATO, there is a full stop boundary where NATO stands up. And I think a critical thing to think about here as we look at it as Americans, and I live in London, I spend a lot of time traveling Europe. We need to remember we have asked the Europeans for decades to pony up more for their own organic defense capabilities. They need to have stronger armies. They need to have a defense industrial base. They need counter-drone technologies. They need artillery rounds and factories that produce these things. So this is a moment when we really need to ask the Europeans to start deploying the 800 billion euro in a Rearm Europe package that they have pledged. And I think despite, many of the, like I said, there are trade and economic issues that have arisen. But when it comes to things like the safety of America, the safety of our Western European allies, the safety of innocent civilians in Ukraine who've been targeted in these horrible Shahed waves of drone attacks for 3 years and missile attacks and hypersonic attacks, in addition to ground forces in their country. I think that this is potentially a moment when we will see Europe step up in its own right to be a partner, a full partner in the NATO spend and in the NATO defense industrial base and military capacity effort.
We'll certainly be watching this story, see if Vladimir Putin and the Russians continue to make these kinds of incursions. Andrew Boreen. Andrew, thank you.
There you have it, you guys. And so we're going to see where we go from here. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. But as I mentioned to you, today, September the 22nd, you can see this video footage coming out from the Times of India. Have not been able to trace down any American news media outlets that are showing the actual speech. But in the speech, as I mentioned to you, we're hearing that Putin had issued some threats of military attacks on NATO, and he discussed a potential nuclear deal with the United States. And that is what has made headlines today across American news media outlets, is that Putin said that he is willing to abide by a nuclear arms deal with the U.S. for a 1-year extension after it expires after February of 2026. Now, in addition to that, I mentioned to you that we saw that UN meeting take place discussing Article 4, what is going on, and I played for you the video footage as the United States said it will defend every inch of NATO territory if things escalate. We heard that mentioned yesterday by Donald Trump as well. And I also discussed with you what was said, and it was not nice. The back and forth, it was pretty intense. Estonia, Poland, the UK, the United States, all condemning Russia for its reckless behavior. Russia coming out and accusing leaders of primitive hatred and baseless claims against Russia. So today, September the 22nd, 2025, things are just escalating. And as I mentioned, what we saw coming out of that, the United States said they will defend every inch of NATO territory. So the U.S. is coming out and saying, We're going to be a part of it. And yesterday as well, I shared with you Donald Trump vocalizing the same thing. Trump warns the U.S. will defend Poland and the Baltics. If Russia keeps escalating, we don't like what is going on. And as I mentioned for you, we actually saw that video footage of what was spoken at that UN meeting by the U.S. representative saying the U.S. will be right there. So let me know your thoughts. Are we going to be having war or peace? But as of today, September the 22nd, 2025, it looks like things are escalating. Drop it in the comments. War, peace. Where do we go from here? Now, this is the latest coming out today. It is currently 5:27 p.m. Central Standard Time here in Houston, Texas, September the 22nd, 2025. As more comes out, I'm sure there's going to be a whole lot more. I will continue to keep you up to date on it every step of the way, so that way you know exactly what is going on. And Eli, thank you for the $2 super chat, says Denmark has been dealing with drones today as well. I'll go ahead and take a look at that, because as you guys know, I appreciate the information that you share with me. I try to cite all the sources. I'll look it up. If I can find that this is actually happening, valid information coming in, I'll go ahead and share it, put it on the screen, read right from it, hyperlink it in the description. I cite all the sources like a book report, so that way you can know and rest assured it's the latest information coming out. But that is the latest, you guys. And like I said, we'll see where we go from here. I'm seeing war pouring into the comments. Regardless of whether it's war or peace, I'll be sure to report it here on the channel. But thank you guys so much for joining me, and I'll catch you in the next one. Take care. God bless. This is Steve.